Welcome to the Gita in Action podcast. I'm Radha Priti, and I'm here with a family of seekers, and we are reading through the Bhagavad Gita. We're continuing through chapter 4 today. And I don't know about you guys, but actually, you know what? Today's our 50th episode. It's our 50th episode. Yay for us. For those of you who have been here the whole journey, you've studied the Gita for 50 hours, so it's pretty exciting. And I don't know about you guys, but it's so purifying to me. Yesterday I had kind of a rough day. I was sick, it was cold, and my daughter wouldn't take a nap, and it's just like one of those days everything was just like irritating to me. And I sit down to prepare this class, and I'm just like automatically I just am like feeling better, and then I get kind of like caught down a rabbit hole of like reading about different avatars, and it just completely lifts me up. And that's what the Gita does to us, reading about God, talking about these principles and how to upgrade our lives. It's purifying. And no matter where you are, if you're having a bad day, a bad week, a bad year, this stuff can really pull you out just by listening to it. So thank you all for being here. It gets me through the weeks, and I hope you all feel the same. So we're gonna start chapter 4, text 4 today. And I kind of like it when you guys read the text. It's kind of nice. It makes me feel more connected to you guys. So if you want to read today or you're able to read, will you just put your hand up right now, your little emoji hand, and then I'll know to call on you. And if you ever want to join us live, Seeker's Quest, email me at seekersquest108@gmail.com, and I will send you the links. And you can also email me about anything that you want. Mariah, I see your hand up, and I see Maria's hand up. So do you guys just want to alternate the verses today? And we can start with Maria, if you'd like. Does that work? We're going to start at 4:4. So if Maria, you want to start reading 4:4 for us. It should be up on my screen. Please go ahead. If you're not ready, we can start with Mariah. Mariah, do you want to start with 4:4?
I'm sorry. I was muted and I didn't realize it.
No problem.
Arjuna said, the sun god Vivishvan is senior by birth to you. How am I to understand that in the beginning you instructed this science to him?
Okay. So Arjuna's raising a logical question, right? He's saying that he's given this knowledge long ago, but Arjuna knows history, and how could Krishna have given the knowledge to the sun god so long ago? If remember, that was like millions and millions of years ago. Like, was it like 220 or something million years ago? So Krishna appears in a human form and doesn't seem to be that old, obviously. And the sun god lived so long ago. So this question reflects the common human tendency to see God in limited human terms. We have our conception of how long a life is, and how, life is finite, has a beginning, it has an end. We know about how long it is, and therefore that's how we just see everything around us. And as we know, that is not God, right? He's an exception to that. And this verse, it also shows us how we as students should act. We should be inquisitive and submissive. The way Arjuna asks this question indicates both how curious he is and his humility. His tone is not like, that's crazy. That doesn't make any sense. You're wrong. But his tone is more like, I don't understand. It's like kind of, there's like a vulnerability to it. And we all know the difference too, right? When we're having conversations, even with like our loved ones, and they say something that, even if we don't agree with them, if depending on our tone of voice can depend on whether we're going to have a bad or good night with them, right? Like in terms of how we respond to them. If we're like, I don't really understand what you're saying. Can you explain that more? Whereas if we're like, you are off your rocker, that makes no sense. So there's this element of curiosity and humility. And this is a powerful combination for someone who wants to learn. And what we see here, he's not just like Arjuna's not just blindly accepting the point because he's surrendered to Krishna. You remember he surrendered to Krishna in 2:7. He said, "I'm your disciple. Please instruct me. I'm surrendered to you." That doesn't mean he's just like blindly accepting the point, but he still uses his intelligence to ask a critical question without being disrespectful. So he's still looking to kind of own his own understanding. And that's how we should be. We shouldn't be we we should approach the guru with curiosity and humility, understanding that we don't know everything and that we're there to learn, and at the same time being interested enough to learn, you know. And this is helpful for us when we have a tendency to either immediately reject something that we hear that we don't understand, or unthinkably accept whatever we hear, even if we don't understand. We can oscillate between those two, either like complete rejection or like, I don't really fully understand it, but I'm just not going to think about it deeply enough and just accept it. Because that's kind of a superficial understanding anyway, right? So it's better to use our intelligence to find a trustworthy authority, like we talked about in the last class, a guru. And you can also have, like, I have a not I don't talk to Ranaswamy monthly, but I have another guru that I talk to monthly. And we have this kind of relationship. He gives me a lot of guidance, and he really empowers me. Actually, he's a wonderful person. But this is what we should do: find a trustworthy authority and try to understand their message. Someone that we can trust, someone that we feel like understands us, someone that we feel safe with, and so that we can have that kind of submissive attitude towards them. It's not like just to have that towards anybody. We have to discern that level of trust, but these kinds of relationships are so integral to us in our spiritual lives, in refining our understanding and growing. Right? Okay, so 4-5, Krishna's going to answer this question. Mariah, do you want to read 4-5? Share my screen.
The personality of Godhead said, many, many births. Wait, the personality of Godhead said, many, many births, both you and I have passed. I can remember all of them, but you cannot. O subduer of the enemy.
Okay. So here, Krishna's highlighting his position. His form and his appearance are transcendental, and he takes birth by his own divine will. He just decides to come down, not due to his karma like us. We know from chapter 2 that when our body dies and our soul moves on to another body, we take birth depending on our desires, right? What we're looking for and what we deserve, what our karma is. That's what determines the body that we're in. That's why we take birth. Krishna's not subject to the laws of karma, right? So he just takes birth by his own divine will. Right? And we know that Krishna is God from the Gita. We know that that's a message of the Gita, and Arjuna does as well. But now Krishna's really establishing his divinity, emphasizing it more than he has in the past. Earlier he's made reference to his divinity. In the second chapter, when we talked about the first time we talked about this cycle of self-destruction, and we talked about how to deal with that, how to get out of that cycle, and that's to redirect our consciousness to God and to regulate. In that section, Krishna kind of referred to his divinity. He did it again a couple times in chapter 3 as well, but here he's really emphasizing it now because the question requires him to do so. Kind of like if somebody was questioning a doctor and what a doctor was prescribing, and the doctor needs to communicate his credentials. That's kind of what Krishna's doing here. It gives the authority of his message. So Krishna's talking about the similarities and differences between him and Arjuna, or him and the living beings, right? Both have many lives. When the Lord appears, his associates appear with him. So Arjuna, though in a different capacity, would have appeared with him when he talked to the sun god. So Krishna is saying here, Krishna remembers this, but Arjuna forgets. And this is a normal feature of reincarnation, is that when we start a new life, we forget our previous life. So we begin with a new slate. Krishna says that this is true, but there's exceptions, and Krishna is an exception. Right? Arjuna forgets due to his change of body. Right? Arjuna's soul is conditioned by material nature. The Lord's body is Satya Ananda. Right? It's eternal, it's full of knowledge, it's full of bliss. And if you remember when we talked about the qualities of the soul, the qualities of the living being soul, we talked about how it's spiritual and it's Satya Ananda. So while our soul is Satya Ananda and our body is material, the Lord's body is Satya Ananda. It's the same quality as our soul. Right? And we talked about this before too, how our soul is the same in quality to Krishna, but it's different quantity, right? But there's no difference between Krishna's body and his self. Right? Everything in relation to him is spirit. And as we know, the conditioned soul, our conditioned soul, is different from the material body. And we spent a lot of time studying that in chapter 2, the difference between the soul and the body. So this is just imagine all those things we learned about the soul, applying that to Krishna. You know, that's what he is in everything. There's no difference between his body and his self. Therefore, his position is different than us, and he remembers. And this really highlights the difference between finite beings and the infinite, all-knowing nature of God. You know, we are very finite. We have limited capacity. We have limited senses. We have a beginning. Our bodies have a beginning and an end. You know, our body, mind, vehicle is very finite. And God is not. He's infinite. He's all-knowing. And some of this is even hard to conceive because we can't so much relate to it. But it's good for us to hear this. And then we can also pray for realizations around it. So if we remember that forgetting our past lives is a condition of material existence, and turning to God for spiritual guidance helps us rise beyond this conditioning. So that's kind of like a takeaway of this verse, something that we can put into action that we can do. Right? Remember that forgetting our past lives is a condition of material existence, and turn to God for spiritual guidance to help us rise beyond this conditioning. Right? And we should recognize the unique position as God, right? Whose knowledge and actions are beyond our limited understanding. Right? We do things because of our ego and because of our material desires. That's like what motivates us in this material existence, right? God's actions are always divine and purposeful. And again, he's not bound by karma. He's not bound by material laws or rules. You know, he is in charge of them, but he's not bound by them. And that's so hard, again, for us to even conceive or relate to. But it also makes his descent so like beautiful, you know, because he has no real reason to do it. And therefore, this is a spoiler alert, he does it out of love. And it's such a testament to that. If we can really work to understand God, you know, we can see that there's no reason for him to do what he does, but he does it out of love. So let's go to 4:6 now. Maria, do you want to read 4:6
Yes.
for us?
Although I am unborn and my transcendental body never deteriorates, and although I am the Lord of all living entities, I still appear in every millennium in my original transcendental form.
Beautiful. And there's a part here. I'm glad that you left this out because I'll emphasize it now. This says, by my internal energy, I still appear in every millennium. So again, by his internal energy, he appears, not by his external energy, not by the material external energy does he appear. It's by his internal energy. That was kind of a fun way to insert that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so 4:6, he's clearly saying that he's different from Arjuna. He's unborn, meaning that he's beginningless. He doesn't have a beginning. He's imperishable, which means he's endless. Again, The soul is also beginningless and endless, if we remember everything that we learned in chapter 2. Another thing here is that Krishna appears rather than takes birth in the way that humans do. Right? His body is spiritual. It's such Ananda. His body is spiritual. It's not material. So it never deteriorates or changes. Right? He appears in his own body. He does not change his body as we change our bodies. If we remember too, in chapter 2, we also learned about the changes of our bodies. We go from youth to boyhood to old age to, and then we start deteriorating. We have the different phases of, we're born, we maintain, we reproduce, and then our bodies, and then we start going down the hill, right? Krishna is not subject to this deterioration because his body is spiritual, right? And when he does so, when he appears, he comes by his internal potency, and he's not affected by the material world, which is like, again, hard for us to conceive of because we're so affected by cause and effect, by the laws of karma, by the material modes, like we talked about, right? Krishna's not. He's like the king of all of these things. He's like the manager of all of these things. Um, he's in charge of them. He's the maintainer, but he's not affected by them. So it's really it's kind of unbelievable, though it appears as if he took birth like an ordinary living entity. Right? So his body doesn't deteriorate, even though it appears that he grows from childhood to boyhood and from boyhood to youth. At the time of the war, he looked like he was like 20 or 25. He had many grandchildren, but he still looked young, and he never grows old, even though he's the oldest person in creation. And so his body nor his intelligence never deteriorate or change. So even though he's in this material world, he's the same unborn, eternal form of bliss and knowledge. And he's changeless in his transcendental body. And Prabhupada says in this purport that his appearance and disappearance, you guys may have heard this analogy before, are like the sun's rising, moving before us, and then disappearing from our eyesight. Right? When we can't see the sun anymore, we think that the sun is on the horizon, right? When actually, we know that the sun is actually in its fixed position. But because of our insufficient senses, we calculate the appearance and disappearance of the sun in the sky, right? To us, it seems like it's appearing and it's disappearing, but that's not actually what's really happening. But because that's, our limited capacity of what we can see, that's kind of what's happening in our mind. And similarly, Krishna's appearance and disappearance are completely different from us, but because of our limited capacity, we see it a certain way. Right? But it's evident that he's actually eternal, blissful knowledge and never contaminated by material nature. So in the same way that we perceive the sun to be something that it's not, we easily put that same kind of misconception on Krishna due to our limited capacity of perception. And his appearance is a divine act of his will. Again, not a result of his karma or material nature. Again, whatever material modes that you're kind of in, you choose a body that's suitable for that. Whatever karma, you choose a body, whatever your desires are, your body is, the next body that your soul chooses is kind of based off of that. Not the case. He's completely above all of this. He's beyond the cycle of karma and samsara. Samsara is a word that means repeated birth and death that we contingent souls experience, right? That's not even in his portfolio. That's not a thing that happens. Krishna is the Lord of all living beings and all of existence. Right? He controls the material energy rather than being influenced by it. So to think that, he's the controller, the ultimate controller of the material energy. And even when he comes down, though it may look like he's subjected to it, he's actually the controller of it, and he's not influenced by it at all. So when you're feeling in a rajasic mood, you have a lot of desires that are insatiable, and or you're kind of tamasic, you're really sleepy, and we get completely controlled by this material energy around us. Krishna isn't at all. He can be completely, in this material realm, but completely unaffected by the material energy. And he comes by his will into this material nature. He just decides. He doesn't have any karma that he needs to burn off. He doesn't have any duty that he needs to perform, like we talked about in chapter 3, right? He doesn't have any of the duties because he's not taking from the system. But yet he comes. Right? In chapter 3, when he talked about how he's an example, he's detached, but he acts as an example. And when was that chapter? It was like, was it in the 20s text, 22 through 24, maybe? He talks when we we're talking about even if you're detached, act as an example for others. And Krishna gave himself as an example, right? Because he's immune from all of that. But yet he comes. So it's like if there's a prison and prisoners can't go out by their own will. They can only leave when the term is over. But the king can come in and go out at will, right? Similarly, there's souls in this material world, and the souls can't just go out, right? But Krishna is the supreme soul, and he can come in and go out at will. So he's categorically, again, establishing the difference of his position. And in this, he says that he keeps coming periodically. And that's what I was reading about last night. I was saying there's so many avatars that have popped into existence in different places and different times to deliver this message, and for other purposes as well. And it's beautiful how Krishna takes care of us in that way. He just keeps coming back. And again, Krishna is the name for God. It means all attractive. It's the name that we use for God. 4-7. Is it Mariah's turn?
Yeah. Whenever and wherever there is a decline in religious practice, O descendant of Bharata, and a predominant rise of irreligion, at that time I descend myself.
Okay, so now he's getting in to his reasons that he descends. So if we consider the prison example, why would the king come to the prison, right? If there's too much unruliness in the prison, the king will come to try to establish order, right? So the implication here is that there's a spiritual level of reality and a material level of reality, right? God exists at the spiritual level, but from there he descends to the material level immediately. And he does this when there's disorder in the world, right? In religion, in social order, people stop performing their duties. People just aren't living with virtue, with righteous lives. God comes down to get things back in order. And this is what we call an avatar. I kept saying the word avatar. This is what we call an avatar. It comes from the spiritual level to the material level to fulfill a specific purpose. And it's saying here that Krishna does this to restore order in the world. 4-8. We're doing so many verses today. It's a verse day. Maria.
To deliver the pious and to annihilate the miscreants, as well as to reestablish the principles of religion, I myself appear millennium after millennium.
So earlier, Krishna says when Dharma goes down and when adharma, which is the opposite of Dharma, right? If we remember that Dharma is like doing the right thing, virtue, performing your duties, when this goes down, when people stop living so responsibly and adharma goes up, people start living more irresponsibly. This is when the divine descent happens. He comes down to correct it. And there are people who are dharmic, right, or virtuous. He comes down and he empowers them, right? He frees them from the vicious. And he disempowers the vicious people. And he comes down and he corrects the imbalance in human society. Now, in general, he expects human society to kind of manage itself. But when it becomes unmanageable, he comes. And he comes and he fixes the imbalance of power in human society. When a dharma becomes much, much more powerful than dharma. And then once the imbalance of power is fixed, he returns. And then he descends again and again because these things keep going down. So he'll come down, he'll fix everything, he'll go back up, things will start going down again, and he'll come back down again. And something to kind of note here, Krishna's destruction of the wicked, it doesn't always mean just physical destruction, right? It can also symbolize the elimination of negative qualities in our hearts, like pride and lust and anger. And this is what we learn from the Gita. This is something we can turn to Krishna to help purify our minds and our hearts from these qualities. We see that he destroys these qualities in us. Some of us that have been practicing for a while, have a regular sadhana or chanting, studying these scriptures, we see how our hearts are transforming, how some of these qualities are becoming less, how our material attachments are becoming less, right? This Krishna's doing this. And then that's what the teachings in the Gita are meant to do, right? To bring us back to Dharma, to living a life of truth and compassion, discipline, devotion. So this is happening through the Gita. He gives us this instruction, this sacred manual, right? This sacred life manual for us to do some of these things, for us to restore Dharma within ourselves. And in that, eliminate things in us that are adharmic, things that have negative qualities. Right? And we see how effective that is. That's why we're here. The other thing we see in this verse that's really beautiful is that God's love for us doesn't get exhausted. Right? It's like your child who keeps, you have a child who likes to touch a hot stove. You come down, you tell a child, don't touch the hot stove. And they reach out again, don't touch the hot stove. You'll never get tired well, you will get tired, but you'll never stop, right? God doesn't even get tired of it. He just keeps coming. But he loves us so much that he just keeps trying. He just keeps trying. He doesn't give up on us, and sometimes we give up on ourselves, right? We give up on ourselves much before God would ever give up on us because God doesn't give up on us. But it's so easy for us to think, I'm not good enough. I can't do this. I'm not deserving of this. God never sees us like that, right? God sees us like we see our children, right? Because we are God's children. And in that, he never gives up on us. He never stops trying to steer us to the right course. He always gives us the option. He never imposes it on us. He never forces anything or pushes anything. But he
You too.
sorry, I just hear somebody. Okay, I'm just gonna mute. But he never gives up on us. Just so beautiful. And that's what this descent demonstrates, these two big things. The human tendency for disorder to increase. And so he comes down, he fixes everything, he goes back up, and it happens again. And that's just like par for the course, right? We humans have kind of that destructive nature, That's what happens. You see it everywhere. I was just thinking this yesterday with trash, the amount of trash that we have. Like, where at some point, like, where's it all gonna go? Like, you give us humans something, and we are just gonna destroy it. The earth, for instance, what to speak of our hearts, And if we could clean our hearts up, the impact that could have on everything around us, including the things we do to the earth for our convenience and so that we can make a little bit more money. Or so this is a human tendency, though. It's for disorder to increase, but it also demonstrates God's inexhaustible love. So we should always try to upgrade our lives. We should always try to live dharmically. But if we find ourselves struggling, never think that you're below, God's love, because you're not. He never gives up on you. Never gives up on you. I remember my mom used to say that to me. She's on the call right now. She used to say that. I'll never give up. I'll never give up on you. I think sometimes I was kind of rough, and she'd say, I'll never give up on you. I'll never give up on you. God never gives up on us. We're his children, right? And the other part of this that I really like, this is so beautiful. I spent some time researching this too, This also refers to the universality of the Gita's message, right? And that this is not a sectarian reference to a divine descent. It's not just saying this is the one person who comes down to save you, and if you accept him, you're good. If not, you're not. It's all encompassing. So the Gita is associated with the Hindu tradition, but it gives wisdom that is universal. And we can say that great saints and prophets from all other traditions are sent by divine arrangement for the restoration of order in society. Right? God doesn't just appear on Indian soil. He can appear anywhere and everywhere. And the Gita is all encompassing in this. Right? In each and every incarnation, he speaks as much about religion as can be understood by the particular people at those particular circumstances, right? So he appears according to like culture and circumstance and teaches as much as he can to get those people to upgrade their lives without like being over the top where it's impossible standard for them. Buddha is a good example of that. He came and he when like, people were just going rogue, and he kind of reestablished no meat eating. But that was it. That was the only principle that he kind of pushed. I mean, he pushed others, but he kind of really emphasized that one. And in that, it's like he's upgrading people a little bit, but not giving them a mouthful too big that they're not ready to chew or digest. But ultimately, the mission of all of these incarnations is the same: to lead people to God consciousness. Sometimes he descends personally. Sometimes he sends his bona fide representative to take the form of his son or servant or himself in some disguised form. But he comes, right? And he spoke to Arjuna because he was highly advanced compared to ordinary people in other parts of the world. And we've talked a lot about the qualifications of Arjuna, and we're continuing to see them, even as he's asking this question at the beginning of the 4th chapter. Right? So Prabhupada says, just like 2 + 2 = 4 is true in both beginner's math and more advanced math, still there's lower and higher math classes, right? So in the same way, all of the incarnations of the Lord teach the same principles, but they appear to be higher and lower in varied circumstances. And so beautiful about God. He's like the expert doctor, distributing the medicine. He distributes it to the people in the time and the circumstance and the place, the amount that they need, to grow a little bit. That's not gonna be too much for their system at the time. He's expert in that. And the Gita is inclusive to all of these incarnations that come to get people back on the dharmic path and lead people toward God's consciousness. So I love that point about the Gita. I think it's really beautiful. Okay, now we've approached the last verse. Does anybody want to share anything before we go to this last verse? Okay. Maria, 4:9.
Sorry about that. One who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities does not, upon leaving the body, take his birth again in this material world, but attains my eternal abode, O Arjuna.
Okay, so now we're really getting to the nectar here. I mean, it's all nectarian, but this is a really fun one too. So the beginning text talked about the history of yoga knowledge and how it was given long ago. Remember, we talked about the disciplic succession. We talked about how this knowledge was first introduced to humans like 2 million years ago. And then Krishna came and repeated it to Arjuna 5,000 years ago. And that's why we have the Gita. Arjuna asked a question at the beginning of the 4th chapter. And in response to that question, Krishna talks about his position and his mission. That's where we are now. And these last couple verses we just talked about, 7 and 8, he talks about his universal mission, right? Establishing Dharma in the world. And this is a mission for everyone. Along with that, he talks about his personal or his more specific mission. And that's where we are now in text 9 and 10. And that's this more intimate mission to liberate humanity, right? The first mission to establish Dharma in the world, like basically get us humans to behave ourselves, it's a mandatory thing, right? Everybody has to follow the law. Those that don't follow the law will be punished, right? The second mission is voluntary. It's voluntary. It's for individuals to decide to take up. Right. So if we consider that like Dharma is like the basic morality or ethics or law, then everybody has to follow it. Like in a government, in a society, you know, the government has laws we all have to follow to keep kind of things in order. But then the government doesn't just want people to be law abiding, but they also want them to be responsible. Right. It's kind of like that. From there, it's like a funnel. So okay, there's a certain standard that we all need to act at just so that we can function, you know, just so that we don't like destroy ourselves. We all have to get on that platform. And then from there, it's like, okay, but people also need to, for this really to work, for this really to go to the next level, people have to be kind of responsible, you know? And that's kind of where Krishna is. Like, let's restore Dharma. And then from there, the funnel is to help people develop prema or love of God. And that's ultimately Krishna's mission here that he's talking about in text 9 and 10, is this inspiring change in the human heart, directing it more towards the spiritual. And like the precursor for that is like, you know, let's be a decent people. Like he teaches this dharma, this laws, this way to live with morality and virtue. But ultimately, where we're going is to develop this love of God. And we're trying to create this fertile ground in our hearts to develop this love of God. And Krishna does this directing the human heart more towards spiritual. He does this through his pastimes. You know, through these pastimes, when he comes down and he performs these different activities in this material domain, he reciprocates with those who love him. And in this, he provides a spiritual legacy of his beautiful pastimes to devotionally attract humanity forever. Right. And if they develop love of God, if we develop love of God, then we'll attain love, then we'll attain God. So text 7 and 8 are talking about the broader vision for all of society. You know, he comes down to empower the virtuous and disempower the vicious, right? In 9 and 10, now where we are, this message is especially for all spiritual seekers. Right? Krishna wants everyone to be a spiritual seeker and everyone to come to him, but he doesn't force that on everyone. Which is beautiful. You know, that's where our free will comes in, because without free will, there's no love, right? You can't just like force somebody to love you. You know, anyone ever been in a relationship like that where it's like, I'm gonna control you such that you love me, you know, like love me. It's like that. That's not how it works, right? And so God doesn't, he gives us that free will. You know, he doesn't impose that on us. But ultimately, that's what he wants for us all. It's to be in that reciprocal loving relationship with him. So Krishna's unborn, like we learned in 4:6, and he has no duties. We learned that in the middle of the 3rd chapter. And he doesn't have any obligation to come down here and do what he does when we talked about duty in the 3rd chapter. You know, we all have a certain responsibility because we take, so we have to give back. But Krishna doesn't. He doesn't take, so he doesn't have any duty. Right? Therefore, while he appears here, his appearance is not like our appearance. Right? Like just when we talked about the prisoners and the king who go to the jail. It's both are doing the same thing. Both may look like they're in the same place, but they're very different. You know, they're different in who they are, and they're different for why they're there, right? How they got there. So there's a fundamental categorical difference between these two. And similarly, with Krishna, he appears to be born and does activities, but he's not like a normal living being, and his activities are not materially motivated. He's not bound. He has no motivation for personal gain, right? Everything he does is simply an expression of love. You know, those of us that have studied Krishna's pastimes when he comes here, we see that, right? It is so easy to love. He's so easy to love as a child. You know, he's so easy to love his whole life, just through his pastimes, through his kind of personality. with the things that he does and doesn't, right? So we should understand that Krishna has come to this world, but he's not a part of this world. He's a divine being. And that's what's being referred to here when we say know the truth in this verse. We say, one who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities does not, upon leaving the body, take his birth again in this material world, but attains my eternal abode, O Arjuna. Right? That's what we're saying here when we say know the truth. It's not that we know it on a superficial level, but on a deeper level, right? We understand the reality of what is actually happening. And to the extent that we can understand the reality, we can become attracted to God, right? To the extent that we actually understand what he's doing and why, and his loving nature that he has for us, we can become attracted to him. We can understand that this is the God of love. He doesn't have to come to this world, but he does to demonstrate his loving pastimes, right? How could we not fall in love with a God that merciful, right? And by doing that, by coming here and performing his pastimes, he attracts our hearts. And he wants us to reconnect with him. That's like his whole purpose. And he never gives up on us. I just love that point. It's he just never gives up on us, even though we give up on ourselves. He never does. He keeps trying. Right? So we talked about an avatar, who's at the spiritual level, who then comes down to the material reality. Krishna is an avatar who comes to the material world from the spiritual world, performs his pastimes here, and then goes back up to the spiritual world. So the pastimes that he performs in this material world is like a trailer to a movie, right? And the pastimes in the spiritual world are like the movie. But the trailer is supposed to attract us to the movie. So when we are attracted to that, we won't be born again in this world. So there's a divine descent, and the purpose of that divine descent is to inspire the human ascent. Right? So divine descent, the purpose of the divine descent is to inspire the human descent, or the human ascent, not descent. This is another point I like about the Gita. He's not like a typical savior figure. He's not saying, I'll save you. He's saying, I will empower you with wisdom, strength, and ability. And you make your decision. I think it's so beautiful. The focus of the Gita is on empowering humans to make good choices. That's what we're doing here. This is it. These are your choices. These are the consequences. This is the way material nature works. Make your decision. And I'll love you no matter what. It's really beautiful. It's the ultimate testament of love, right? It's like, it's nice when somebody comes in and saves you, right? We appreciate that. But when somebody comes in and teaches us how to save ourselves and then loves us no matter what, that feels like really loving, right? So how do we know? How do we know that we know? Again, in this verse, it says, one who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities. Okay, so we hear it. It's like, okay, check the box. I know it. I've heard it. I can check the box. I'm good. I'm free. I'll go to the spiritual world after this birth, right? But we know that that's a little bit superficial in itself, right? So how do we know when we know? It's not just about accepting Krishna as divinity, right? It's about actually becoming attracted to Krishna and immersed in Krishna, right? And to the extent that we're immersed in Krishna, to the extent that we'll obtain Krishna, right? And that's what's going to be elaborated in the next verse. So how do we know we know? We know by what we love. So it's easy to say, oh, I love God. But then are we more immersed in politics or movies or entertainment or relationships? But we say, I love God, but what are we really immersed in? Where's our consciousness really? Where's our heart really? Right? What we know is seen by what we love. Just like if a person's smoking cigarettes and they say, oh, I know it's dangerous, but they're still smoking it. Oh, I know it could kill me. Okay, do you really know? Do you really know? Or do you just say that? It's like on what level, like how strong is our conviction? How deep does our conviction run? We know by the change of heart. So when someone is really loving God, their heart will be changed by that. And that's inevitable. And that's ultimately how we know we know. And Prabhupada compares the understanding Krishna through merely intellect to licking the outside of a bottle of honey. I don't know if you guys have heard this analogy from Prabhupada. He's saying licking the outside, it won't give you any sweetness, right? You're just interacting with like the outside surface of a honey bottle. But to actually experience the sweetness, we need to open the bottle and taste it. So in the same way, it's not enough just to have this like intellectual understanding of God and spiritual truths, right? We need practical realization through devotion and surrender. That's what tasting the honey actually is, right? So chanting the names, reading his pastimes and meditating on them, cultivating faith, surrender, humility, acts of devotion like prayer, service to others, offering food to God. You know, these kinds, this kind of these practical things that we can do. And this is what's so beautiful about the Bhakti path is there's so many of them. There's so many of them, and they're all so sweet, right? Like tonight, I'm going to go to a kirtan and sit. Several of us on this call actually are going to go to a kirtan and sit for a couple hours and listen to this spiritual music and just kind of be taken away, right? It's beautiful. It's joyful. You know, it's not even like work. It's fun. It's connecting. It's like when you get to go out with, you know, some your beloved and have fun. That we get to do that. You know, we get to go. Krishna gives us these ways to connect to him. So if we're doing that regularly, a little bit every day, you know, maybe there's a time in the month or a time in the week, you know, where you have a little bit more of an immersion. Time in the year where you have a deeper immersion. You know, if we're doing these things consistently, then we'll start to build this relationship. And as we build this relationship, our heart will inevitably transform. And that's when you know, you know. So that is all that I have for you all today. Mariah, please share your reflections with us.
Thank you. This class was so beautiful, and I love how you brought in Krishna's causeless mercy. You know, it's like real unconditional love. Like no matter what you've done, no matter how far you think you've fallen, he is always there. He's always coming to pick you back up. Like it doesn't matter. You know, we've probably done way worse stuff in previous lives, and he's just like, well, you know, if you try and get to know me, I'll forgive all of that. You know, like ultimate forgiveness. No one can have that other than God. You know, I mean, we can try and uh, give that and be that, but ultimately, only Krishna can forgive everything, every offense, and that's a beautiful thing. So I love that you brought that up, and I definitely have started to experience that a little bit in my life, you know, just how much he's reciprocated and changed my life just within the past few years. And a thing about eternality, one concept that I remember being told when I was young about eternality is that, you know, there's no beginning and no end. But the one thing that we can see in this world that has that is like a circle or a ring. A ring has no beginning and no end. It's just continuous. And you know, because that's such a hard concept to really grasp. Like I can remember contemplating that as like a young child, like eternality, no beginning, no end. Like everything here dies and is birthed. You know, everything like the earth cycles, the seasons, everything has a beginning and an end. But to have that concept of no beginning and no end, it's like it is hard. It is hard to think about that when we've been conditioned in this world. But a ring is such a tangible thing that we can think of that has no beginning and no end.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so I used to like meditate upon that as a kid, but and other realizations came up to me, but the biggest one was just yeah, that causeless mercy and the different avatars that keep coming. And that's such another beautiful thing too, because it's so unlimited. Like Krishna's appearances and disappearances are so unlimited, and like the different forms he even takes and comes in, it's like, you know, at first when you're hearing them, it's like this is beyond what I can even conceive. It's unimaginable. Like Krishna's different forms are just like they seem crazy, you know, like to the modern uh uh mind, it seems crazy. But when you start to develop that practice and that faith, and you hear from the authorized devotees, they become, like you said, it becomes like a trailer where you're like, oh my God, I'm so attracted, like I have to know more. And then it attracts us and we're intrigued, and it's amazing. Like I remember listening to a class from somebody, they were visiting New Vrindavan, they're giving Bhagavatam class, and they're like, you go and you tell people, yeah, Krishna's this blue guy in the sky, and and he does all these amazing things, and he defeats these gigantic demons, and it's like most people are like, are you smoking something? And he's like, no, but really we should be in awe, we should be amazed by these, and it should intrigue us and open us up to want to know more. And yeah, that's another just beautiful thing of how go ahead.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, it's
Beautiful.
just, you can't put God in a box, He's like, he's gonna take you outside of that box and be like, I come in all these different forms, like don't put me in a box. So
Oh,
yeah.
beautiful. Thank you for sharing. It's funny, it's like so beyond our material conception. Even like the healthiest relationship that we have like it can't be unconditional. It's like as much as great as my husband is, there's certain things that I could do that would be the termination of our marriage. Like that's just, material existence. But that's not Krishna's love for us. It doesn't terminate. It's like it's beautiful. Even like we're taught like it's healthy in this material existence to have these kinds of boundaries that, to support our growth but at the end of the day, Krishna's love is unlimited and unconditional. And it's for us to even really conceive what that means. It's beyond what we could really relate to. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Those were beautiful. Thank you. Katie, would you like to share with us?
Very well, thank you. Um, yeah, I mean, this all has me thinking a similar thing to Mariah. Like, it was just such a nice reminder that, sorry, just put this stuff down. That, like how constant God is there for us, and His love is, um, and how that makes it so much more like inviting, and just it's hard not to fall back like in love in reciprocation. And how, like I remember hearing over different times, like, God is always turned towards us, and it's us who like forget and turn away, or get confused by what we're seeing, and are turned away, and we just need to turn back, and He's always there. And then how He's our ever well wisher and our eternal friend. Yeah, and it just like really made me think about that, and just feel very warm and loving, and that He really shows up for us, and that's the kind of person we in naturally want to, we feel returning love for, and how valuable that is. So I think that's it.
Thank you for sharing. So nice. Trevor's hand's up. Kalpana, your hand's not up, but I'm going to call on you next.
Okay.
Can you guys hear me? Am I coming through clear? Okay.
Yes.
A couple things that I like, very fascinating topics today. I like whenever you get into the Lord's body and whatnot. And I like how you said that He doesn't really incarnate, He just kind of appears and disappears at the right time. It's like we get so identified with the body, we forget that it's only the covering, and because of that bodily identification, we give so much credit to the illusory energy, the external energy, and God has it doesn't control God. It can own us at any given time, but when it comes to God, the material energy has to follow God's direction. So when He comes here, He just kind of appears and disappears. He doesn't really technically have past times. He only says it's only labeled as past times. I mean, because time only has jurisdiction in the material modes of nature. It doesn't really have jurisdiction over God. So he just uses these terms so that we're able to understand, because we're so identified with the bodily concept that that's how we measure things in this world with time and whatnot. So it's just fascinating. But that last quote that talks about once you understand his appearance and disappearance, you don't have to come back here. He's talking about development. You know, when you develop your consciousness, there's a difference between knowing something and having a deep realization. And whenever you were talking about how that happens through love, that's the perfect explanation. It's as simple as that. The more you engage in the kirtan, the more you engage in your austerities, and the more you morph your life into devotional service, the more your heart comes clean. And the more you get the heart clean and the mind cleared out, the more room God has to do his thing inside of you. So through love comes understanding of God, you know, and through that relationship, a deep realization occurs, and it blossoms like a flower when it's ready. And it's like a constant epiphany. It goes from questioning to inquisitive thoughts, you know, to having spontaneous fears and doubts, to having those washed out, to just having pure peace and knowingness and clarity. That's all. Oh. The Haribo.
Haribol, Haribol.
You're on mute.
Oh, I'm on mute. Thank you. Kalpana, do you have any realizations you'd like to share with
Yeah,
us?
I loved what Trevor just said, that, the more we do kirtan, the more we are into satsang, the more we clear our heart. And that gives God the opportunity to come and do what he wants to do. That is, give his love, and so that we can go to him. And I like this chapter because there's so many differences we talked about between us and God. Krishna is all Satchidanand, and we are just a spark. It's just the soul. Our karma we do depending on our desires, whereas he does it for dharma establishing. And the second reason is more fascinating, that is out of his love. And then we are affected with the three modes, but he's not. And there are so many things that were there in this chapter, just to know more about Krishna. That was so nice.
I keep going on mute for some reason. You got a lot of them. That was such like a nice little highlight reel you just had there.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for joining.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all for joining and sharing. This keeps us going throughout the week, throughout the month, throughout the year. So let's keep it up, coming together, this community. Thank you all for being here. And we will continue on Monday. Have a great weekend.